This is not a terrorist organization. Tayo yung biktima dito.
The Justice Department plans to appeal the dismissal of the government's petition to declare the CPP-NPA as terrorist.
Ito sasabihin ko sa inyo, yung bias ng judge in the decision was there even with Red Tagging talked about in the decision, even if it was not an issue in the case. Kaya makikita natin, there was really an unfair decision by the judge. Kaya hayaan na natin, ganun talaga yun. But we're better off going to the Court of Appeal kasi ito talaga may jurisdiction ngayon.
Justice Secretary Boying Remulla plans to bring their case to the Court of Appeals, and they want to seek to declare the Communist Party of the Philippines and its armed group, the New People's Army, as terrorists. This was recently dismissed at the Manila Regional Trial Court. Will it get a different ruling at the Court of Appeals? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Roby Alampay. Kasama ko po sa studio, Ed Lingao of One News. We're here in Mandaluyong. Tapos online from Manila, kasama natin si Pamintuan of the Philippine Star. Happy
weekend.
Friday. Parati ka pa rin, advance Friday na nga. Advance ka pa rin ng ano.
Wait na ba? It's a weekend already. It's Friday night.
Anong balita, Ami? What leads us to the weekend?
Natuloy din yung meeting ni President Marcos with US President Joe Biden. At siyempre, expected naman yung mga sinabi, reaffirming the alliance and Biden reiterating, lagi naman sinasabi yun ng US, no, na the commitment to defend the Philippines is ironclad.
Kanina nga kausap namin sa Big Story si Manny Mogato. And, I mean, he points out what everybody's pointing out, just the fact na nagkita, di ba? After 6 years of the Duterte administration, this did carry a lot of weight, a lot of symbolism, meaningful gestures on both sides. Pero Ed, substantially, what did they talk about?
Pero kasi naman yung benchmark mo is
very
not even low. It's non-existent.
Yeah.
You had the president before who refused to even go to the US.
And not only that, was actually hostile, really hostile. So but now ngayon nag-usap si President Marcos, President Biden. What did they talk about? I mean, was South China Sea even mentioned, for example?
Well, there was a lot of expressions of support as expected, all couched in diplomacies, a lot of talk about the rule of law and support for each other and their positions. Pero as far as South China Sea is concerned, there was mention of South China Sea, pero as to how far the U.S. is going to go in defense of the Philippines, for example, of its interest in the South China Sea, I think that's always been a question mark.
Sabi nga kanina, ang kausap namin kanina, si Alexis Romero, reporter niyo sa Philippine Star. He's there in New York. Sabi niya nga nabanggit ang South China Sea, but there was no details other than saying na pinag-usapan ng South China Sea. Same about human rights. Joe Biden said he wanted to talk about human rights. They acknowledged na napahapyawan, pero wala ring detalye.
But those are things that normally you don't expect them to talk about at that level or for it to be publicized at that level.
Yes.
Those are things that are...
symbolism yung nagkita sila. During the United Nations General Assembly, bihirang makipagkita yung US President with any head of government.
Although nag-correction yung Malacanang.
That it was not the only. No, it was not the only. Nonetheless, Malacanang does have that point to make, and it is a valid one that it did happen. They requested for this meeting. It did happen, and the president will in fact come home. And hopefully we get some details. And I'm sure yun din yung mga usap-usapan that we will pursue with the president, with the spokesperson, and with officials as they come home. But later, we speak to our first guest. We'll continue our conversation that we started yesterday, and we will continue it after the break. Keep it right here on One News. The Justice Department will make an appeal on the ruling of the Manila Regional Trial Court that dismissed the petition of government to declare the CPP-NPA as terrorists. Let's dive deeper into this matter with DOJ spokesperson, Atty. Mico Clavano. Atty. Clavano, welcome, sir. Welcome to the Chiefs.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, sir.
Ed.
Sir, first of all, linawin ko lang po. I admit I'm not very clear on it, but there will be an appeal. Justice Secretary Remulla said you will appeal to the Court of Appeals. At the same time, I'm reading about, really planning to file a new case as well, no longer based on the Human Security Act, now basing it on the Anti-Terror Act. The judge did turn, the decision of the judge did turn on that point, but we'll get to that later. I just want to clarify first, are these two separate things or are they actually one and the same?
Actually, sir, they're two separate things, no? The first reaction was, of course, to file a motion for reconsideration and then eventually file a petition for certiorari via Rule 65 to the Court of Appeals. However, sir, after some deliberation in the department, it was decided that since the former petition was filed under the basis of the Human Security Act, which was repealed by the Anti-Terror Act of 2020, that we would just file an original action for prescription with the Court of Appeals. Just as a background, sir, the Human Security Act, in that law, pwede ho tayo mag-file ng petition sa RTC for prescription. However, in the new Anti-Terror Act of 2020, that is no longer found in the law. What is found in the Anti-Terror Act, however, is that the original action should be filed with the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
Kaya po, if we file a motion for reconsideration under the old, it would be quite moot, no, and academic, meaning to say, wala nang basehan yun kasi hindi na live, hindi na effective yung batas na yun. So we would rather file an original action here in the Court of Appeals using the Anti-Terror Act of 2020.
But sir, you using when you do file a petition for prescription with the CA, are you going to use exactly the same pieces of evidence, the same arguments, or are you drafting an entirely new petition with a different set of arguments and different set of evidence, especially considering that the Manila RTC rejected the first one?
Yes, well, there will be some similarities, no? Of course, we will also add additional evidence, especially those that have transpired from the time we filed the former petition.
2018.
To today, yes. So, of course, we will also keep in the petition the fact that the CPP-NPA was designated as a terrorist organization by no less than the United States Department of State as well as the European Union. And these are not light things. Parang mabigat din ito na designate sila ng US tsaka EU. So of course, these are the things that will stay in the petition. But of course, we will also have to strategize and make sure that the new petition that we will file in the Court of Appeals is much stronger and will have much more basis in fact and in law.
Will you also cover other portions of the decision? Kasi si Judge, I think Justice Secretary Crispin Remulla mentioned na it's very peculiar that the decision also covered red tagging na hindi naman daw binanggit doon hindi naman kasama doon sa petition niyo. Are you going to address that issue as well in your new petition?
I don't think, ma'am, it will be necessary to address those we call it obiter dictum, things that were not alleged in the petition but were ruled upon by the judge. Parang naging superfluous na yung mga cautions na yun. And in particular, as what Secretary Remulla mentioned, yung red tagging was never alleged in the petition. It was never an issue put into play. And we feel like it was a bit unnecessary for the judge to rule on facts, especially because the nature of this petition was an ex parte petition, meaning to say, wala kaming kalaban supposedly. Kami lang, ang government lang through the DOJ filed the petition putting forth all the evidence, and the judge was supposed to rule on the basis of the evidence only. So for her to have ruled on facts and issues that were not presented in court by the DOJ is quite necessary, we feel. But nandiyan na yan, di ba? We can't really do anything about it. We respect, of course, our co-equal branch in government. The executive and the judicial branches are separate branches. So we have to respect, and we will just have to do our own independent analysis again of the case so that we can file this new petition in the Court of Appeals.
Yeah, but Attorney, I'll seize on that to lihis ng konti dun sa kaso mismo. You know, because whether or not you will argue that certain points are relevant or irrelevant, and however the judge or the court takes those arguments, I would like to dive into some of the principles that or at least the arguments that the judge was leaning on. No? Whether or not you will take this as points to be raised. No? But yung una, for example, making a distinction between acts of rebellion, even armed struggle, even violence per se, even terroristic acts, making a distinction between that and terrorism per se. And that argument turning precisely to your point on intent, no? Where basically the judge says that tinayo naman yan. Di naman nila sinabing they're doing violence for the sake of violence. Sinabi nila they're doing violence to achieve an ends which the judge actually said are actually quite noble if you look at them objectively. I mean, your thoughts on that. I think a lot of people find that fascinating as well. And we'd like to hear, lawyers, maybe they take a finer comb through these arguments.
Yes, actually, that's a very good point, though. But I would like to point out that yung basis ng decision was the Human Security Act. Under Section 3 of that law, it defined what terrorism is, and that is sobrang iba na ho yung definition sa bagong Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, now found under Section 4. Under the old law, there were the crimes found under the revised penal code were listed, and on top of that, so it has to fall under one of those crimes. And on top of that, there's a qualification that it has to the violence caused widespread fear
or
and panic. Yeah, so and then but here in the new law, it's become a bit more liberal. It's been they opened up the definition to include bodily harm or injury, diba? Seriously, death, and under the same definition, the second paragraph, it actually excludes yung mga yung free speech, freedom of expression as part of the definition of terrorism. So the discussion of the judge in this case really had as a framework yung definition under the Human Security Act, which we will see in the new petition to be filed in the Court of Appeals na hindi na yon yung framework na gagamitin natin. So a lot of the discussion in the decision by the regional trial court will no longer be applicable, and this is one of them. Yung when the judge alluded to yung rebellion as opposed to other normal crimes and terrorism, hindi na ho yan magiging relevant dito sa ating bagong petition.
Pero Asek, in particular, the judge argued that political purpose is also what differentiates rebellion from terrorism. How is that going to be addressed in your new petition with the CA?
Well, everything can be cloaked under the color of politics or it being political. I believe that communism has as its essence the violent overthrow of the government. That's really the essence of communism, and you'll see that in the history of communism, Marxism, and so what is really being punished here? What's being guarded against by the Anti-Terror Act is not the political belief behind it's the violence, it's the criminal behavior of these organizations that they engage in. And once it oversteps the boundaries of law, in which case, in this case, once they start to use violence as their means to achieve their end, that's where they will encounter problems with the Anti-Terror Act of 2020.
Would this decision have any impact on other acts using the Anti-Terror Act? Such as last year, you classified 19 persons as terrorists under the ATA, no? And earlier this year, 6 more. Kasama na yung Abu Sayyaf. Would this have any impact also on the Anti-Money Laundering Council freezing the assets of persons and groups classified as terrorists? Yung mga nangyari na.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, the point of designation, which is an administrative act, purely executive kasi yun eh. The only consequence of a designation is you start to trigger the powers of the Anti-Money Laundering Council. So once a terrorist group or a person is designated as a terrorist, then they open themselves up to the freezing of their accounts, the freezing of their assets. As opposed naman ho sa prescription, which is a judicial matter naman, the consequence of a terrorist organization or a person being proscribed as a terrorist is now the mere membership in that organization, as proved by evidence, like pictures or videos or IDs, will already result to criminal liability. And also the recruitment of members into the organization proscribed to be a terrorist organization will also be criminally liable under the Anti-Terror Act. So yun ho yung binago ng Anti-Terror Act sa HSA. So they clearly define kung ano yung designation, kung ano yung proscription. So it's clear the designation is much more, it's lighter because it's purely administrative. It's faster. It's unilateral by the executive branch. On the other side, you have to pass through the courts. Kaya mas mabigat din ang consequences na mangyayari kung ma-prescribe talaga as a terrorist organization.
Attorney, is there an impact as well, not on other acts, but on other cases levied against the Anti-Terror Act itself? As you know, there is many challenges before the Supreme Court on the Anti-Terror Act. As you argue this from the position of the Anti-Terror Act, is there an implication for the cases to defend the Anti-Terror Act before the Supreme Court? When you compare, for example, the definition of terrorism in the HSA versus the ATA, some would argue that the ATA has actually lowered the bar on how to define terrorism. Even the matter of intent, you take away from ideology. Now it's just intent to harm. Kanina you used the term liberal. Some people would say that that's a euphemism for vague. So it's a more vague definition. What do you think? Is there a risk here as well for the cases in trying to defend the ATA before the Supreme Court?
Yes, actually, it already passed the constitutional muster, the constitutional challenge, which was filed in 2020. There were 37 petitioners that filed petitions to declare the ATA as unconstitutional. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court decided, no less than the Supreme Court decided that the law is actually constitutional. In doing so, it struck down two paragraphs of the Anti-Terror Act as unconstitutional. One, you're correct, sir, was part of the definition. Meaning to say, the Supreme Court, aside from that one paragraph in of Section 4, which defines the acts of terrorism, found that the definition found therein was constitutional. And the other provision or the other paragraph that was struck down as unconstitutional was under Section 25, which was the second way to designate a terrorist group or a person, no, as such. So yeah, I understand, no, that the Anti-Terror Act has become a bit stronger. And for me, and for I guess I speak on behalf of those that advocate for this law. You need to empower our law enforcement agencies to really stop this type of behavior, this type of well, really, it's a war, no, against those who want to overthrow the government. And so, for us, no, we believe that if it's entrusted into the right hands, that it will be a very effective way to stop terrorism in our country. And the goal here, and I think everybody is on the same page here when I say that all we want is peace and order in our country. All we want is for our Filipino citizens to be secure in their lives. Yun naman talaga ang goal nito eh. And I think that giving this power to the law enforcement agencies to stop or to nip at the bud any terrorist acts that may happen is always going to be something for the Filipino people.
Asik, is there any way that the new petition that you plan to file with the CA would be affected by the decision of the Manila RTC? By the Manila RTC? I mean, I suppose that already is jurisprudence because it is already a ruling. So, ano yun? Will the petitioners refer to this, and could it be used as arguments?
Well, just because it was based on the former law, the Human Security Act, I don't think it will carry much water. There might be some discussions there that they will pull up, no, to counter our case for proscription. But the framework that they used in this petition was really the Human Security Act. And at the very beginning of the decision, it was made clear by the judge that that is the framework that she's going to use. That's the definition that she will measure terrorism by. And at the end of the day, that definition no longer applies.
What about... Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sir, what about the question of double jeopardy? How does this in any way not fall under the concept of double jeopardy? Basically, you're asking the same question now to a different court, of course, using a different law.
Well, this will be very interesting, I think, no? Because a case for proscription is not necessarily a penal statute. It's a sui generis type of action, meaning to say it's one of a kind. And double jeopardy will only apply in criminal cases. So they can allege that, but I believe that being a sui generis type of case, being one of a kind or very unique.
Yes, sir. Yes,
The
sir.
discussion will be very interesting.
Yes, sir. But let me tuhugin ko lang yun, sir. But at the same time, you're asking the court to declare an organization illegal and doing illegal actions and making the members liable for arrest.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
hindi ba criminal din yun?
Yeah. No, I understand where you're coming from, no? And obviously that will be the discussion that will have to be made. But the other side of that, ano naman, would be that it's not, no penalty will be meted out by this decision. There will be no imprisonment in this decision. There will be no fine. So it's difficult to say that it's a criminal action because it's only preliminary to possible criminal liability in the future. So again, it will be a very interesting discussion, no? It will be an opportunity for the judiciary to finally decide on the real nature of a proscription case. As of right now, of course, since the law is very new, there's no jurisprudence really on what the nature is of a proscription case.
Since you're not appealing, you're not filing an MR, and you're filing an entirely different petition, can we say na final na tong ruling na to? And it will be binding na?
Well, that's the thing. We will forgo our remedies to appeal, to file a motion for reconsideration in this case, and eventually, of course, yung Rule 65, which is an appeal up to the Court of Appeals. And so yes, the decision will be final, but it will be final as to the definition, or the decision will be final as to the Human Security Act. However, there's a new law, and the jurisdiction, as I mentioned earlier, na-transfer na ho sa Court of Appeals.
Yes.
And so, given the new law, the RTC is actually devoid of jurisdiction to really have a say in the prescription. No? Under the new law, under the Anti-Terror Act and its new definition, it will really be up to the Court of Appeals to prescribe a terrorist organization.
Pero hanggang wala pa yung prescription na yon, in the meantime, kasi sinasabi ng armed forces, they will continue their counter-insurgency operations against the CPP-NPA. So may legal basis ba yung kanilang operation?
Well, of course, they have every right to go and stop any criminal activity. No? But they, as of the moment, they have no basis to arrest
Insurgency.
Yes, ma'am. And that's ano naman, under any circumstance, as long as there's an armed conflict, the armed forces will have every right to stop that type of behavior.
Okay.
What about yung standing warrants noon for the CPP-NPA members? Can they enforce?
The standing warrants from...
Arrest warrants. Kung may arrest warrants in connection with the insurgency, pwede yung i-serve.
Well, ma'am, if the arrest warrants were issued based on other criminal activity, let's say kinasuhan sila ng murder or kidnapping or any crime found in the revised penal code, pwede talaga silang hulihin pa because those are independent of this dismissal of the proscription case.
Okay. Sec, we have a short time left. During kami, we want to take advantage of your presence with us. We do appreciate it. POGO issue, yung deportation nitong mga illegal workers, may update ba tayo doon?
Well, sir, the Secretary of Justice, Boying Remulla, met with the Chinese Embassy 2 days ago to discuss kung paano nila gagawin itong summary deportation ng mga Chinese nationals. And there were two main topics in that meeting. First was the verification of the identities of the Chinese nationals to be deported. Kasi syempre, sir, kailangan ho natin maging sigurado na mga Chinese nationals talaga itong mga to. And so they, usually kasi, sir, pagdating nila dito sa Pilipinas, kinakancelan na nila yung yung passport nila para, and they change their own identities because they want to conceal their identities here in the country. So that was the first point, that we had to make sure that we verify everybody's identities before we move on to the next step, which is actually to deport them. Second topic in that meeting was a safety protocol that would have to be followed before sending them back to China. As we all know, we're still in a pandemic right now, so we'll have to go through the necessary testing to be able to bring them back to China.
Okay.
And well, additionally, just to note also, the Chinese embassy was very willing to cooperate with our government to deport the Chinese nationals back to the Philippines. A lot of them aren't well, here in the Philippines, they're not treated very well by their employers. So you could actually describe it as a rescue operation. No? And of course, another consideration there would be the timing of it all. We're talking about 40,000 Chinese nationals that we need to send back because they are here illegally or their visas have expired and other scenarios like that. No? So to send them all back at once, medyo mahirap yun. Magkakaroon ho tayo ng humanitarian crisis as described by Secretary Remulla. So what we need to do is to time it well, to coordinate properly with the Chinese embassy so that we have a seamless and smooth process of deporting all these Chinese nationals.
The Secretary did mention 280 already in custody, that you're ready to proceed with summary deportation. You also mentioned 40,000, which begs the question, what's the real scale of this problem, especially if, as you said, a lot of people, we proceed from lack of identity for a lot of people. I presume this was happening even before China cracked down on POGOs. There may have been rogue elements as well. We get your point that for a lot of people, this could also be described as a rescue operation. But is the 40,000 the full scale of it, or the remaining problem, or is there a bigger scale here?
Well, the 40,000 is based on a list given to us by PAGCOR. They canceled 175 POGO licenses because they were either no longer paying the government or they have some sort of violation on the license. And so from that 175, sabihin na natin, sir, na 200, no? Times the number of employees that each POGO company has, average that to about 200 each. That's why we came up with the number of 40,000. So, of course, 40,000 is a big number, no? So right now we have 218 or 200, less than 300 that are already in custody in Pampanga, who are set to be deported already.
Okay.
And that will be the start. And then the Secretary already ordered the NBI in coordination with the Bureau of Immigration, with the help of PAGCOR and the PNP, to ensure that those POGO companies that have been canceled are ordered shut. So once that happens, sir, magkakaroon na talaga tayo ng mass deportation, because then all these employees of the closed or canceled POGO companies will have to be sent back.
Yeah, but in the meantime, how are we imagining the? But in the meantime, how are we imagining the 39,000 plus now dispersed wherever? I mean, again, I mean, what's the assumption here in terms of, you know, what percentage is we could treat as a rescue operation, and what percentage is, you know, the other worst scenarios?
Well, at the end of the day, no, whether you consider it a rescue operation or otherwise, they are here in the Philippines or in the country illegally already, because they don't have visas, or their visas have already expired, or they have criminal records, or they've done their behavior is just simply unacceptable. No, it's again, going into the logistics of things, it's going to take a lot of coordination, yeah. And we plan to do this little by little. We're not going to do a full-scale operation and send them all back all at once. So we plan to do about 1,000 or 2,000 first, and then hopefully, as time goes by, we send the rest home as well.
Pero where are they being housed ngayon? Ang dami nun, 280. Who's feeding them? Who will pay for their airfare, for example?
Yes, right now, ma'am, they are in Pampanga, in the hotels that they really were staying at. And the general rule is that they bear their own costs. So they are the ones feeding themselves. They are the ones that pay for their hotels. And when they go back to China, they will be the ones who will pay for their own airfare.
Okay.
Yes, sir, but if they're not working anymore, I know this shouldn't be your problem, but it is going to be your problem. If they're not working anymore, and of course this does take some time, and you're talking about living in a hotel, so what happens?
Well, that's the only time, no, that the government will have to come in and source funding for this. But if we time this all well, and we hope we do, and I think we're taking concrete steps towards doing this smoothly and seamlessly, the government won't have to shoulder a lot. So it's only when there's proof that the Chinese nationals really cannot anymore afford to pay for their own sustenance, their own lodging, and their own flights that the government will come in.
Siyempre sabihin nila, hindi nila kaya.
Yun nga.
To Filipinos,
I mean, of course, we'll have to really dig, no, for
Okay.
for any centavos in their pockets.
Balik ka rin ba yun?
Balik na rin natin. We'll see if any coins come out.
Okay, well, Atty. Mico Clavano, maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat, sir.
Appreciate it, sir. Atty.
you.
Clavano, of
Maraming
course,
salamat.
is a spokesperson for the Department of Justice. And let's start up another conversation. After a break, please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back.
President Bongbong Marcos and U.S. President Joe Biden finally met on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly.
Isa ito sa mga naging highlight ng 6 na araw na working visit ni PBBM sa Amerika.
Your partners, we are your allies, we are your friends. And in like fashion, we have always considered the United States our partner, our ally, and our friend.
Nanumbalik ang malalim na alyansa ng Pilipinas at ng Amerika kahit nagkaroon ito ng lamat nung nakaraang administrasyon.
The two leaders acknowledged the deep ties between the Philippines and the United States.
The relationship between the United States and the Philippines, to state the obvious, has very deep roots. We've had some rocky times, but the fact is it's a critical relationship from our perspective. I hope you feel the same way.
Welcome back to the Chiefs here on One News. Despite the rocky times between the Philippines and the U.S. during the previous administration, President Bongbong Marcos Jr. now seeks to reinvigorate the country's ties with the Western superpower. This first meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden. And here to discuss this is University of Asia and the Pacific Political Economy Professor Michael Garcia. Professor, welcome to the Chiefs and thank you for joining us.
Evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Magandang gabi, sir.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yes, sir. Of course, sir, everybody's saying that the meeting itself, just the fact that they met is already significant coming after 6 years under President Duterte. And you know, we all know how outspoken he's been about the U.S. ties. But at the same time, everybody's also been trying to divine the nuancing behind the diplomatic language of the two leaders. Let's start off, sir, with your assessment of what they talked about.
Yeah, thank you. I think there seemed to be a marked shift in Philippine foreign policy under President Bongbong Marcos. I think generally President Bongbong Marcos is sort of in a charm offensive, trying to woo the United States, not just President Biden, but also companies and other institutions and other leaders in order to, as you said, try to reinvigorate the relationship between the Philippines and the United States. But I think it's not yet a return to pre-Duterte foreign policy or pre-Duterte Philippine-U.S. relations. If you look at the statements, I think it's broad and it's safe. And it's simply a signaling and sort of a reassurance, especially from Bongbong Marcos, that they're willing to work very broadly with the United States, under his administration. There's several things that were not discussed. For example, even if the South China Sea was mentioned very explicitly by President Biden, the issue of the Mutual Defense Treaty was not discussed, which is perhaps one of the most important things that has to be discussed at their level. So generally, I think it's trying to bring dignity back to the Philippines presidency, but at the same time, it's not a complete turnaround from what we saw in pre-Duterte times.
No, but was that necessarily the objective? I mean, he did say we will. It is the expression has in fact been that we will still continue to pursue, and that's the continuity there. We will still continue to try to pursue an independent foreign policy. It is not back to pre-Duterte times in the sense that that was not really independent. It was really clearly aligned with the United States. But I guess that's my question. It's not back to that, but was that the intention at all? I mean, beyond resetting and recalibrating this independent balance, finding a better balance, a more dignified balance, as it were, both in intent as well as in tenor. But is that the intention anyway, to necessarily go back to pre-Duterte positions?
I think President Bongbong Marcos understands the value of China and the relationship of the Philippines with China. In fact, even if there's still no official visit between with Bongbong Marcos and China, you could see really that there's still a value given to China even before the elections. He was he already met with the ambassador. Yeah. Sorry, I'll just wipe my. Yeah.
But with this reinvigoration of bilateral ties with the U.S., are you also seeing a corresponding shift in our relations with Beijing?
We do not yet have a rigorous and comprehensive foreign policy towards great powers. By that, we mean great powers such as Russia, China, and the United States. I think that's something that we need to have. For example, China has that very comprehensive sort of study and policy formulation towards neighboring countries. We do not have that yet. I think that's something that this administration has to do. They have to convene a group of experts to discuss Philippine positions towards great powers such as China and the U.S.
Are you also seeing a shift in our relations with Russia, for example?
We've seen a lot of. Not yet. I think we're trying to. There's still no conversation, for example, with Russia. There's still no big statement coming from President Marcos about what to do with the Russia issue. But since you talk about Russia, actually, what I want to say is Russia and Taiwan. I think this administration has to know that it's not simply an OFW issue. It's not simply a repatriation issue. It's an issue of national security. What happens in Taiwan and what happens in Ukraine. One of the things that I hope was discussed is, I think hopefully this was in the mind of President Marcos, is that if the United States is too thinly spread in Taiwan or in Russia or in Ukraine, then we will have essentially difficulty defending ourselves when the time comes that China also attacks us.
Yeah, but to that point, because Taiwan looms much larger nowadays in the global consciousness, is there I don't know if this is necessarily a bad term, but is there an opportunity for the Philippines to find its place and to leverage its position in the global arrangements? And might that what will that mean, for example, in discussions not just about the Mutual Defense Treaty, but also the former U.S. bases?
Sorry, the question is about leveraging Philippine positions.
Because Taiwan is such a obviously an important topic and a big concern right now. What does that do in terms of the Philippines positioning itself, not just for our own interest, but for in the interest of us having some kind of an influence and say in the regional arena, if not the international arena, putting into play, for example, not just the Mutual Defense Treaty, but the former U.S. bases, for example?
Yeah, so there's that. You know, we really have to look at what type of partnership we have with the United States, because we will definitely be dragged into this war if we allow, for example, the United States to have access to our bases. So this is something we really have to think about and we really have to calculate. And you know, in the field of international relations, there's a concept called security dilemma, where essentially you really just want to secure yourself, increase your defense posture, but at the same time, those actions threaten other states. So once we sort of pursue those types of arrangements, such as the access to bases, we really have to ensure that it doesn't necessarily, you know, threaten China, so much so that China attacks us already.
Sure. Well, anyway, the two leaders talked about, of course, the South China Sea, and they expressed support for freedom of navigation and overflights. I'm wondering what you think, or how you think China is going to respond to this discussion. I know not much has been said, not much detail has been said, but the fact is that they talked about it, and Biden intends to talk about it some more.
Yeah, so I think China is watching very, very closely. They, of course, for both countries, you know, the Philippines is a very strategic ally, and you know, we are definitely a very important part of their goals in international relations. So it's something that they're watching very closely. I think you know, China will not take this lightly. Of course, there are not many details, and China will definitely look at the other things that we will say, not just the conversations between Bongbong and President Biden, but of course our diplomats, our defense chief, our foreign affairs chief, and how they converse with their U.S. counterparts in the near future. So it's something that China will definitely look at and observe very closely.
No, President Marcos also pitched for our membership as a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. What do you think of that? What will be the impact for us?
Well, the United Nations Security Council is a very important institution. I think it's, you know, really the intention is really trying to create a diverse coalitions among countries because the competition is you know, already heating up very much. So I think the membership will help towards that diversification of alliances.
Sir, can you give us an idea exactly how significant was the fact that President Marcos spoke before the General Assembly?
You know, actually, a lot of world leaders have the opportunity to speak in the UN General Assembly. I don't think it's very unique, but what he said and what he was trying to do, which is to try to rejoin the global norms, you know, such as health, you know, common response to health, common response to environmental issues. That means that the Philippines is trying to, you know,
to regain a footing,
comply and to try to go back to the global norms that were established before and that were sort of you know, not totally severed, but sort of questioned by a more sort of non-Western president, such as President Duterte.
Those questioning was really on the global level. On the regional level, President Duterte did not necessarily put us in that footing. You know, it remained civil with the Southeast Asian nations and ASEAN in particular. President Marcos, in fact, also did reach out first to our regional neighbors, Singapore, Indonesia. What do you see about how the government is seeing its role in ASEAN and the role that it sees for ASEAN?
You know, I was actually very happy with the visit to Indonesia, and because of many reasons. Indonesia is such an important country because of its population, because of its defense capabilities, and the leadership role that it plays in the ASEAN. Indonesia is also one of the countries that will want to pursue a common response in the South China Sea. So I think what it tries to do, really, the visit tries to do is to it puts ASEAN centrality back, meaning it puts ASEAN back into the equation. It puts the institution at the center. I think that was also the intention of President Marcos in that visit.
Okay, Professor Garcia, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Professor Robin Michael Garcia of the University of Asia and the Pacific. And that is it for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. Ako po si Roby Alampay.
I'm Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.